Hello friends, welcome to Historical Pulse on this channel. You will see the video about the world top in history on this channel. Your knowledge will be increase and your mind will be refresh. Let's view the video. The real story behind the French Revolution, Seeds of Rebellion, France before the storm. France in the late 1700s was a kingdom of dazzling palaces and crippling poverty. While the nobility danced in silk at Versailles, peasants barely survived in the countryside. But beneath the luxury and lace, a storm was brewing. A storm of hunger, rage, and awakening ideals. The burden of inequality. French society was divided into three rigid estates. The first estate was the clergy, privileged, tax-exempt, and rich in land. The second estate, the nobility, lived lives of inherited wealth and status. But the third estate, which made up over 95% of the population, workers, peasants, and the rising bourgeoisie, carried nearly all the tax burden and had virtually no political voice. Injustice wasn't hidden. It was worn like a crown by the privileged and suffered daily by the rest. Hunger and harsh winters. Bad harvests in the 1780s led to skyrocketing bread prices. Bread was a staple for most families, and soon it became a luxury. Hunger turned to anger. As children cried from empty stomachs and adults lined up for scraps, the king remained silent, and his court continued feasting. For many, the crown had become blind to its people. The royal detachment was not just painful, it was infuriating. Enlightenment. Ideas that set fire to the mind. As Europe buzzed with Enlightenment thought, France became a hotbed of revolutionary ideas. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu questioned divine rule, called for liberty, and demanded equality. These weren't just books on shelves, they were sparks in the minds of the oppressed. The notion that all men are born free and equal challenged centuries of royal power. Suddenly the crown was not sacred, it was a question mark. Debt, decay, and a broken economy. Years of wars, including the expensive support for the American Revolution, had drained the French treasury. France was bankrupt. And when the monarchy tried to impose new taxes, the privileged estates refused. The third estate was furious. Not only were they poor, but now they were being asked to carry the weight of a kingdom collapsing from its own greed and vanity. The fuse was lit. All the elements were in place. A starving population, a corrupt elite, fresh ideas of freedom, and a crumbling economy. France wasn't just on the edge, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark was coming. The fall of the crown, Louis XVI, and the end of monarchy. As the revolution gained momentum, all eyes turned to the palace. King Louis XVI, once seen as the absolute ruler of France, found himself trapped in a world he didn't understand and couldn't control. The Estates General and a fateful vote. In 1789, Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General, hoping to solve the financial crisis, but instead of unity, it sparked rebellion. The Third Estate, tired of being silenced, broke away and formed the National Assembly, declaring themselves the voice of the French people. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a revolt. The doors of power were being kicked open, and Louis was paralyzed. The storming of the Bastille. On July 14, 1789, revolution became reality. Parisians stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny, searching for weapons and justice. Heads were paraded on pikes. The people had spoken, with blood. The Bastille didn't just fall, so did the illusion of royal invincibility. Louis XVI now faced a nation that no longer feared him. The Women's March on Versailles. In October, thousands of women, fed up with hunger and injustice, marched to Versailles, dragging cannons and demanding bread. They weren't just shouting, They were forcing the king and queen to return to Paris as prisoners of their own people. It was humiliation on a royal scale. The monarchy was no longer above the people. It was now at their mercy. Flight to Varennes. The king tries to escape. In June 1791, Louis XVI tried to escape France, dressed as a servant, fleeing toward Austria. But he was recognized and arrested in Varennes. The betrayal shattered what little trust remained. To the people, the king wasn't just weak, he was a traitor. The crown was now a symbol of cowardice and lies. Trial and execution. The guillotine awaits. By 1793, the revolution had devoured its old gods. Louis XVI was put on trial for treason. His defense fell on deaf ears. The verdict, death. On a cold January day, the king ascended the scaffold. As the blade of the guillotine fell, so did centuries of monarchy. The crowd cheered, not out of cruelty, but out of a belief that justice had been served. The era of kings was over. The people had taken back their power and their history. Rise of the people. Bastille, bread, and blood Paris on edge. The summer of 1789 was thick with fear, rumors, and rage. In the streets of Paris, whispers of a royal military crackdown echoed from one market stall to another. The people believed King Louis XVI was preparing to crush the revolution. In response, they prepared to defend themselves, not with laws, but with weapons. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, an angry mob of citizens marched to the Bastille, an ancient prison and a powerful symbol of royal oppression. Though it held few prisoners, its thick walls represented centuries of absolute monarchy. Armed with whatever they could find, the people demanded gunpowder. Shots rang out. Chaos erupted. After hours of bloody fighting, the mob broke through. The Bastille fell, brick by brick, soul by soul. Heads of guards were paraded through the streets. The king's authority was shattered in a single stunning act of people's power. Bread riots and the Women's March. But the revolution wasn't just in Paris. In towns and villages, food shortages worsened. Bread was more valuable than gold. In October 1789, thousands of women, market workers, mothers, laborers, gathered and marched over 12 miles to Versailles in the rain. They didn't chant slogans. They chanted for bread. They stormed the palace. They found Marie Antoinette. "Let them eat cake," the queen allegedly said, though she never really did. But it didn't matter. The anger was too deep, the symbolism too strong. The royal family was dragged back to Paris. The palace was no longer a sanctuary. The revolution had entered the king's home. The great fear and peasant uprisings in the countryside, the great fear spread. Peasants, armed with pitchforks and fury, attacked the homes of nobles. Manor houses were burned. Feudal documents, symbols of centuries-old oppression, were torn apart. This wasn't just a political revolt. It was a social eruption. The foundation of France was being ripped from underneath the feet of the elite. The Declaration of the Rights of Man amid the flames and fury, the National Assembly issued a groundbreaking document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It declared that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. For the first time, liberty wasn't a privilege, it was a birthright. But revolutions don't stop at declarations. The streets still thirsted for change and blood. Reign of Terror, Robespierre's bloody revolution. Rise of the radicals. As the revolution intensified, moderate voices were drowned by cries for justice and vengeance. Maximilien Robespierre, once a soft-spoken lawyer, emerged as the revolution's fiercest defender. He believed that terror was a necessary tool for liberty. The guillotine became his symbol, swift, cold, and impartial. The guillotine's hunger in 1793, France was at war with enemies inside and outside its borders. Foreign monarchies wanted to crush the revolution. Inside France, royalists plotted revenge. Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety responded with fearsome precision. Trials became executions, suspicions became death sentences. Over 17,000 people were executed, many without proper trials. No one was safe. Nobles, clergy, moderates, and even fellow revolutionaries were guillotined. Accusation was enough. Loyalty was never enough. The blade fell, day after day, in Place de la Révolution. Death of the Queen Marie Antoinette, once the glittering Queen of France, now stood before a revolutionary tribunal. Stripped of her crown, dignity, and allies, she faced her fate with eerie calm. On October 16, 1793, she was executed. The crowd cheered, not for her death, but for what it symbolized, the end of the old world. But even as royalty died, the new world turned darker. Festival of Reason Religion itself became a target. Churches were closed. Priests were hunted. Robespierre introduced the cult of the supreme being, replacing God with abstract ideals. Paris turned into a theater of philosophical extremism. Statues of liberty replaced crosses. Logic replaced faith. But fear replaced freedom. The fall of Robespierre eventually, the revolution began to consume itself. Robespierre's paranoia grew. Friends became threats. Allies disappeared. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre was arrested. The very machine he built turned against him. The next day, he was guillotined. The reign of terror ended not with a whisper, but with the fall of its high priest. The aftermath, from chaos to Napoleon's. Versailles 300 words, a nation in ruins by 1795, France was exhausted. The monarchy was gone. Thousands were dead. The economy was broken. Streets that once echoed with revolution were now quiet with grief. The dream of liberty had come at a terrible cost. Power struggles and the Directory. A new government called the Directory took power, but it was weak and corrupt. It struggled to rebuild France while facing enemies at home and abroad. The revolution's promise felt distant. People wanted order. They wanted strength. They didn't want another king, but they wanted someone who could lead. Enter Napoleon. Bonaparte in this moment of chaos, a young military general named Napoleon Bonaparte rose to prominence. Brilliant, ambitious, and ruthless, he offered something France hadn't seen in years: victory. By 1799, Napoleon staged a coup. The revolution was over. France was no longer a monarchy or a republic. It was now under the command of a man who would crown himself emperor. But the ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, would echo through time. The world had changed forever.